Greetings, I'm Harvey Cthulhu. Please subscribe and please hit the notification bell because YouTube has changed its algorithm and so smaller channels like us are getting shunted aside. Please subscribe. Thank you.
Director Todd Phillips' Joker is a work of genius that makes most Hollywood movies released in the 21st century pale in comparison. I have already rhapsodized about what a tremendous film this is, so I'm not going to devote much time in this video to how much I respect and admire Joker. If you want to hear me go on at length about how brilliant and unexpected this film is, check out my previous non-spoiler review. You'll find the link to that review in the video description. Joker is a throwback to the heyday of 70s auteur cinema that pays homage to such masterworks as Taxi Driver, The King of Comedy, Raging Bull, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and Network. Before I saw Joker, I would have said, they don't make him like that anymore, and I would have been wrong because Warner Brothers hath wrought a miracle here, producing a film that doesn't pander to attention-deficit audiences, a film that doesn't beg to be liked, a film that moves at a leisurely and inexorable pace that makes the explosions of violence all the more shocking by comparison, a film shot on a low budget by a director who actually directs the film, who refuses to shake the camera spastically, grab coverage, and trust the hack editor to slap it all together with quick cuts kowtowing to those sad individuals left with 7-second attention spans by the ravages of social media. Indeed, Joker is an angry film, a filmmaking oasis in the pop culture desert whose mirrored surface reflecting the tropes of superhero movies conceals deep undercurrents of rage, roiling beneath the surface. One gets the feeling that the riot at the end of this film, where the city is torn apart by a mob sporting clown masks, mirrors at least symbolically the rage Phillips feels towards the constraints that have diminished cinema over the course of the last decade. Consider, Phillips used to make hit comedies like The Hangover, absurdly funny little packages of darkness that were genuinely funny. But in a recent interview, when asked if he was going to make more comedies after Joker, Phillips said he was through making comedies because woke culture has made comedy impossible, SJWs have taken the joy and spontaneity out of everything, and nowadays a non-politically correct joke can get you swarmed by armies of zombie NPCs. I find it highly appropriate that as a result of being driven out of comedy, Phillips has made a film about a clown who laughs uncontrollably and isn't funny at all. One can extrapolate from the comments he's made about not directing comedies anymore that Phillips feels like he's been outcast from comedy by PC culture. So it's very interesting to me that Joker is a story about an outcast from comedy, the tale of a wannabe made by a has-been. Joker feels like a prime example of 70s cinema because I suspect at its heart, Joker is a very personal film. Every bit as personal as Scorsese's explorations of alienation and inner darkness made in his prime. Joker is driven to madness at least in part by his inability to succeed as a comedian, a symptom of his larger inability to make meaningful contact with anyone in a hostile and incomprehensible world. Whether on the mean streets of Taxi Driver or in empty rooms filled with the mirthless mocking laughter of Joker, both of these movies are about the same character, a lost soul drifting through an uncaring life, God's lonely man. Arthur Fleck is denied the ability to be funny, just as Phillips is now denied that privilege. And in both cases, for both author and character, Joker is the only sane reaction left. Arthur Fleck is a down-and-out loser, an aspiring comedian with an affliction. He has the unfortunate habit to break out into raucous laughter and giggling fits without warning and in inappropriate situations. The opening of the film is quite disconcerting, as the first scene features Arthur laughing uncontrollably in the dimly lit office of a social worker who, though obviously beaten down by the hopelessness inherent in her job, is attempting to help Arthur reintegrate into normal life after spending some time in an insane asylum. This is a very off-putting and uncomfortable introduction to Arthur and his world, and that's how Joker functions. This movie throws you into the deep end of the pool and doesn't care whether you sink or swim. This is not that kind of movie. Joker gives no quarter and asks no indulgence. This movie is all out of dams to give, a lashing out against the blandness of modern movies, the timidity of modern PC culture, and the idea of films as a commodity that must accommodate the least common denominator. Arthur Fleck is, therefore, not a likable character. He is an anti-hero in classic 70s style, presented neutrally, unflinchingly, and without judgment. Arthur Fleck's journey is not so much a descent into madness as a tour through hell, a hell burning with alienation and desperation where every hope is false and every laugh an affliction. Arthur lives at home with his ailing mother, who has been keeping a secret from Arthur all these years. Living in desperation, Arthur's mother regularly writes letters appealing to her former employer, Thomas Wayne, for financial help. Yes, apparently Arthur's mother used to work for Thomas Wayne many years before, and she believes that if she can just get word to him about their desperate financial straits, Thomas Wayne will be moved by compassion to save them from poverty. As a result, Arthur finds himself a bit obsessed with millionaire and mayoral candidate Thomas Wayne, as well as late-night talk show host Murray Franklin, an amalgam of Johnny Carson and David Letterman played by Robert De Niro, a casting choice that is in and of itself an homage to Scorsese's film The King of Comedy, in which De Niro plays Rupert Pupkin, a desperate comedian who abducts a talk show host in order to get on his show and get his big showbiz break. In this homage to King of Comedy, Arthur Fleck improbably gets his big break when his open mic stand-up act bombs spectacularly, gets caught on film, and prompts talk show host Franklin to mock him on national television, which in turn leads to an invitation to come on the show and be humiliated by Franklin in person. But this happens late in the story, after the central set piece of the film, a scene where three rich scumbags beat Arthur up on the train, and in turn, Bernard Goetz style, Arthur guns them down. This scene was raw, powerful, bravura filmmaking by a skilled director flexing his creative muscles, one of the greatest scenes I've seen, perhaps in a decade. The angles Phillips selects, the use of shadow and light almost evocative of German expressionistic cinema, the pursuit of the lone fleeing survivor through the shadowy subway station by Arthur in a sequence somehow reminiscent of Friedkin's brilliant chase in The French Connection. This sequence sears the screen and rivets the attention of the audience as empty superheroics and the destruction of cities by invading aliens never quite can. It is lens without cheap moralizing or political subtext, stark ugliness presented in such an unfiltered and unflinching manner that it can't help but make the heart of any true cinematic aficionado soar with elation. This is true cinema, the crafting of a sequence in a deliberate and intelligent manner, never allowing the visceral energy of the moment to escape the director's sure and steady grasp. This is precisely the kind of sequence that hacks who direct garbage like Jason Bourne movies would shoot with a shaking camera, grabbing a ton of coverage without thought to constructing a string of coherent images, and then turning it over to the editor to mash together into something that vaguely depicts what happens in an unfocused, lazy slapdash way, and call it directing. Not so for Phillips. Though this sequence is one of the most cinematically thrilling in the film, the entirety of Joker is directed with the same fiercely intelligent control. Even if this control were the sole feature Joker had to recommend it, it would be worth seeing. Fortunately, the visual style and control of Phillips is only one aspect of Joker's genius. Arthur Fleck kills the wealthy bullies while on the train returning home from his job as a children's party clown in full clown makeup. And thus the meme of a killer vigilante clown on the subway spreads like wildfire, and disaffected, alienated people throughout the city start dressing up like clowns themselves, in clown masks emulating V for Vendetta to some degree, protesting the appalling conditions in a city that is deteriorating due to garbage strikes and other civic outrages. In this pressure cooker environment, a deteriorating world whose drift into madness parallels Arthur's own mad descent, anger is turning into violence, leading to a cathartic protest at City Hall as an angry mob dressed in clown masks erupts into a rage that brings Joker to its furious conclusion. At this point, I'm certain comic book fans will be asking, but isn't this all running against Batman canon? Do we really want to know how the Joker came to be? Should we really feel sympathy for the Joker? How does what happens in this movie square up with the Batman universe? Is there going to be a sequel where Joker fights Batman? What the hell kind of comic book movie is this anyway? It is impossible to answer these questions without betraying the secret meaning of Joker, and so that's what I'm going to do now. If you don't want to know this, turn back. You have been warned. Regarding the Batman mythos, this film clearly and decisively quotes that mythology. Thomas Wayne, far from being a benevolent philanthropist, is one of the 1% who regards the 99% as rubes at best, trash at worst. The rich hooligans who attack Arthur on the train and subsequently get shot are all elitist scumbags who work for Thomas Wayne. Indeed, Arthur Fleck discovers during the movie that Thomas Wayne is directly responsible for the terrible situation he and his mother are in when he reads one of his mother's letters to Thomas Wayne and discovers that Thomas Wayne was his father. He decides to stop by Wayne Manor to confront Thomas Wayne about this, and instead he encounters Bruce Wayne there. This sequence is enough to make the heads of Batman fans explode, as Bruce Wayne, who is shown to be maybe 7 or 8 years old, sees Arthur approaching. He slides down the bat pole, the pole on his playscape in a manner meant to evoke the avenging Cape Crusader he will one day presumably become, and has a rather tense conversation with Arthur through the iron bars of the front gate. Later, Arthur manages to corner Thomas Wayne in the bathroom at a movie theater, who callously informs him that his mother was nuts, that Thomas is not his father, and that Arthur was adopted. Thomas Wayne then punches Arthur in the gut and tells him to get lost. At the end of the film, with clown-masked rioters razing the downtown area, Thomas Wayne, with his wife and son in tow, emerges from a showing of Zorro the Gay Blade and ducks down a dark alleyway where he and his wife are promptly murdered by a random clown, leaving Bruce alone amid the bodies in a scene we've seen a million times in the Batman mythos, rendered with loving detail right down to the pearls, flying through the air. So, does this sound like Batman to you? No? Me neither. But this doesn't bother me at all. How can I say that, you wonder, when I've made such a stand for canon, even laying down laws of canon and declaring that without respect we reject? Well, I have now discussed in some detail the plot of Joker, and most of what I've just told you is probably a lie. I am now going to make the case that Joker is a movie that partially or entirely takes place in the mind of a mental patient in an insane asylum. At one point early in the narrative, we cut to something we presume is a flashback, showing Joker banging his head against his cell door in an insane asylum wearing a straitjacket. The subsequent social worker scenes imply that he's out of the asylum and is trying to make a new start for himself. But what if that's a lie? What if he never got out? At the end of the movie, he is shown back in the same asylum. So what if he never left? And all of this has been a fantasy in his mind. There are only two possibilities here. Either the story is a mix of delusion and reality, or the entirety of the film is in Arthur's mind, crafted from memories and stories he heard in his youth. The third possibility, that the movie occurs exactly as it is depicted on screen, I summarily dismiss as impossible. There are too many improbable plot developments to believe that this is an objective presentation of reality. Consider just these impossibilities. For a start, there are many more that I won't mention. The scene where the woman who lives down the hall knocks on his door and asks Arthur if he was following her yesterday. Arthur says he was, and rather than yelling at him for stalking her, she seems flattered and later seems to become his girlfriend. This is crazy. This is a woman who is alone, who has a child, and the sole interaction they've had is paying homage to the end of Taxi Driver in the elevator, each miming blowing their own brains out by raising their fingers to their temples and going just as Travis Bickle does at the end of his blood-soaked rampage in Taxi Driver. This is not remotely believable, and it is a clue early on that we should be very suspicious of everything we're being shown. In fiction, we have the principle of the unreliable narrator. A narrator who, while relating their story, may be lying to us about the details of the story, either because they're trying to rationalize their own questionable decisions, or they're deranged and don't realize that their account of reality is distorted by their own madness. I'm convinced that this entire film is essentially filtered through the madness of Arthur Fleck, and that we can rely on nothing we see to be factual. Consider, what late-night talk show host in the early 80s would show embarrassing footage of a comic bombing on national television? The potential for a crushing lawsuit aside, talk show hosts rely on their affability to make a living. Even Letterman's postmodernist take on the late-night talk show was based around Midwestern decency. Oh sure, he'd do stupid human tricks and didn't shy away from making common folks on the street look goofy, but showing footage of a bombing comic at one of the low points of his life in a time well before social media coarsened the national conversation and character to barbaric depths is beyond the pale. The colorful curtains cue us to the fact that De Niro's Franklin character is supposed to be analogous to Johnny Carson, and Carson would never do something like that. Similarly, the death of Thomas Wayne and his wife. In what reality is a millionaire going to take his family downtown to see Zorro the Gay Blade when it's been well publicized that police are fearing a demonstration riot with hundreds or thousands of clown-masked protesters? And in what sane world is Thomas Wayne going to come out of the theater when a riot is going on outside and lead his family down a dark alley as anarchy rages in the streets? Thomas Wayne isn't going to do that. He's going to hunker down inside the theater at the very least, or make some phone calls and get some private security forces out to the scene to escort him and his family to safety. These very disconcerting moments would be plot holes in any other movie. But at one point, as Arthur's grip on reality, if he ever had one, seems to be getting more tenuous, Arthur asks the question, is it me or is it getting crazier out there? My feeling is, it's you, Arthur. And all of us in this film are seeing the world filtered through your eyes. That's why the whole world is going to hell throughout this movie, because either you're insane in an asylum and you're imagining all of this, or you are indeed out in the world, but a substantial amount of what happens in the movie is hallucinatory in nature because you're psychotic. Without a doubt, reality in this movie is distorted. We get tacit admissions of this in Joker almost from the start. Arthur, watching De Niro's late-night show with his mother, has a complete and detailed hallucination in which he is in the audience watching it live. His laughter gets noticed by De Niro. He gets called down on stage and personally complimented by De Niro, who tells him, "I wish I had a son like you." But then we cut, and Arthur is back in the living room. All of that had just happened in his mind. Initially, I dismissed that as a fantasy, a daydream. And yet, later in the movie, the woman down the hall who becomes something of a girlfriend to Arthur is revealed to be at least partially unreal when he goes into her apartment and she reacts in horror at finding him there, not really knowing who he is. So then we see in a series of flashbacks moments in the film when we saw her with him, but then we see that she wasn't there at all. He was just imagining it at the time, and the fact that we did indeed see her with him in those scenes is proof that in this film we're seeing things through Arthur's eyes and mental constraints. The film's reality is distorted, and we can trust literally nothing we see, though some of it could possibly be true. Towards the end of the film, when Arthur gets into full Joker costume, goes on the Murray Franklin show, and in a scene reminiscent of Travis Bickle's shooting Sport, shoots De Niro in the head. Does that really happen? I doubt it, since Franklin would never really mock a tragically bombing comic on an open mic and then invite him onto his nationally televised network show just to mock him some more. Though I do believe that the incident where Arthur bombs on open mic did in fact happen, if any of it happened, because the incident was too painful for Arthur to willingly imagine. Similarly, Arthur remembered his girlfriend at that open mic, and she was happy for him regardless of him bombing, though at the end he realizes she was never there at all when she confronts him in her apartment with surprise and horror, and it penetrates his delusions just long enough for him to realize, oh yeah, that never really happened, did it? A sufficiently aware viewer is forced then to ask, what other events were delusions to Arthur? And what other delusions has he failed to realize? The riot at the end of the film, where he is surrounded by adoring protesters wearing clown masks who look up to him as he stands on the hood of a wrecked police car. The clown messiah, bringer of murderous mirth to the masses, the deliverer of delightful destruction. Doesn't it seem more likely a delusion than reality? Arthur is miraculously saved from the cops by clowns ramming the cop car as if they somehow knew he was in there. And he is reverently pulled out of the wrecked police car and borne like a fallen hero onto the hood of the car. And when Arthur regains consciousness, he stands up and, seeing he's surrounded by an adoring audience, makes the gesture he made at the start of the film, sticking his fingers into his mouth to force the corners up into a smile that in the end he paints onto his face with his own blood. Is it really possible the epic riot is real? Or is it really just another delusion where Arthur imagines himself vindicated, at last famous, at last revered, at last no longer alone? And so we come to Batman canon. I do not believe the Joker destroys Batman canon in any way because I don't believe Thomas Wayne and Bruce Wayne really exist in this movie. At one point, Arthur finds out that not only was he adopted, he was abused. His mother was crazy and allowed her boyfriend to beat Arthur mercilessly when he was a child, and when the cops found him, he was beaten up and chained to a radiator. That leads me to the notion that this is not a comic book movie at all. Mayoral candidate Thomas Wayne is not that Thomas Wayne, if he exists at all. And I suspect that when Arthur was desperate and chained to that radiator and his mind broke into little pieces, he probably sought refuge in fantasy. And I'll bet he liked Batman comics when he was little. Here he was, an orphan boy, abused by an unjust world. Mightn't he identify with Bruce Wayne, another orphan abused by an unjust world? Mightn't he fantasize, given that his mind is broken under the need to escape his grim reality, that Bruce Wayne and he were brothers? The key to understanding the relevance of Batman to this film lies in the scene where Arthur converses with Bruce behind the iron fence. Where Arthur appears to be in his 40s, Bruce Wayne is maybe 7 years old. So how could this square up with Batman canon? What, was Batman beating up an old man all those years? That would make Batman a bully, a thug, and clearly that's not Batman. That incongruity is the dead giveaway, along with all the other clear instances where reality is distorted, that this is not really a story about Batman at all. It's the story of an abused little boy who read a Batman comic or two before being beaten clear out of his sanity by an uncaring world. It's Sam Lowry in Brazil, having one last fantasy of escape before being broken in his chair of pain. Joker does not break Batman canon because Batman is not really in this movie. Indeed, almost nothing may be real in this movie except for Arthur himself and the whiteness of the asylum confining him. I think even he realizes this at the end, when the therapy in the asylum asks him why he's smiling. He says, "I was thinking of a joke." The therapist asks him, "What's the joke?" And as he thinks about Bruce Wayne in the alley, surrounded by his dead parents as the camera tracks away from him, Arthur replies, "You wouldn't get it." Joker is the joke we won't get unless we too are insane. The movie takes us to that limit, where we as audience members share in Arthur's befuddlement, unable to discern what threads of the narrative might be real and which are delusions in Arthur's mind. In the last shot of the film, Arthur walks down the white asylum hallway leaving bloody footprints. Are they really there, implying he killed his therapist in true Joker fashion? Or are they footprints he imagines because he fantasized about killing his therapist? He capers comically off, pursued by an orderly, leaving smears of red and questions in his wake. For this reason, questions about is this a good Joker movie are rendered moot, and the idea of Joaquin Phoenix shooting a sequel to Joker are misguided. A sequel to this movie would completely invalidate what makes this movie great. For this movie to make sense, there can be no sequel because really there's nothing else to say. Phillips has made his perfect Joker movie, a movie where the clown prince of crime pulls off the ultimate joke and convinces millions of people they're watching a Joker movie where the Joker never shows up. From the center of the earth, this is Dictor Van Doomcock bidding you all, my friends, stay angry.